Well, hello friends and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we're going to talk about how I ended up with really a total dream guitar for me. This is a 80s Glaser Bender guitar that was taken from parts that were up in Joe Glaser's shop attic, and then my buddy Brad Paisley finished them out, and then the guys at the shop put frets on it and stuff, and a bender, and got some Seymour Duncan pickups and Music City bridge on here, and it turned into just an amazing guitar. And again, a dream guitar for me, because I of course grew up in the started playing guitar in the 1980s and got into country music, and of course loved Ricky Skaggs and Steve Wariner and Jeff King and Jimmy Olander and all those cats that were playing Glaser Bender guitars, and I thought they were the coolest thing ever. So today, just gonna tell the story of how I got obsessed with these things, and then how I ended up with the guitar. Gonna go through all the sounds it has, all the sounds it can make, because it's got like a 5-way switch, a tapped pickup. It's got a push-pull to get the outside. It's got all sorts of stuff. It's got a blend control for the middle, so I'm going to show how all that works. It's got a B-bender. So I'm going to tell all about this guitar, and we'll just have some fun. Before we begin, I should just say thank you to all my Patreon members and everyone that has supported the channel through the years. Thank you so much. There's tip jar information. There's merch, t-shirts, coffee mugs, also, and I just appreciate it. So thank you. All right, let's dive in. So I really got into country music through Albert Lee, and through his playing on an Eric Clapton record called Just One Night, and through the miracle of the great Guitar Player magazine. I would buy them by I'd buy them by the stack loads. I would get them. There was a Half Price Books, kind of book and record shop in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I would go there, and they had used Guitar Player magazines, and I would buy them. They were 25 cents each, and however much money I had, I would buy as many as possible, and maybe buy a record or two also. And found out that Albert Lee had played with Emmylou Harris, and then Ricky Skaggs, and all these, and it was kind of like one thing led to another. All of a sudden I get into James Burton, and that gets me into Merle Haggard, which gets me into Buck Owens, and Ricky Skaggs, and get into Steve Wariner and all this. So one of my favorite albums was Ricky Skaggs' Live from London, and it was a great record, had a lot of really good energy, a lot of good playing, and on the cover it showed Skaggs holding a purple Glaser Tele. Now, I didn't know what it was at the time. I just saw that it was a purple Tele, and it was single bound, had a flame maple neck, and it had a middle pickup. And it just looked, I'd never seen a Telecaster that looked like that ever before, and I couldn't really figure out what it was. And you could kind of make out the headstock on the album cover, and I was like, I couldn't tell if it said Fender or something else, because it was a spaghetti logo. So in this, one of my stacks of Guitar Player magazines, there was this January 1987 issue of Guitar Player magazine, which was their 20th anniversary issue, and they had this questions column, and it was written by John Sievert, and someone asked about Ricky Skaggs' guitars, specifically his Violet Telecaster and a Tele style electric mandolin that had a fantastic sound. And so in here, John Sievert, he must have contacted Joe Glaser or Ricky's tech, and so they indicate in there that Joe had made those instruments, that they have a string bender, and also that he was using old Martin guitars. In fact, it's a let's see, what year was it? Of 1949 and a 1961 Martin D28 with Takamine pickups. That's a whole nother rabbit trail we could go down in talking about, the thing where Ricky would take Takamine pickups, he'd rip them out of those Takamine guitars, and he'd put them in Martins. I thought that was hilarious. Anyway, so then I had a name, and I knew who was making those guitars. And then I also saw Steve Wariner playing he had a red Strat that had a matching headstock that he was using, and also he had a Tele that looked just like Ricky's except it was red. And so I knew that I wanted a Glaser Bender guitar. So I started playing gigs, and by about 1992, I was 19 years old, and I was gigging regularly, and I'd saved up about $1,500. And back in 1992, $1,500 was quite a bit of money. And I didn't know if it was enough to get a Glaser guitar or not, but I knew it was enough, it was likely enough to be at least a deposit or something on one. And so I got Joe Glaser's phone number, and I called him up, and someone else answered the phone, and they brought Joe on the line. And Joe was very nice about it, but he said, "I'm not building guitars anymore." And I was pretty disappointed. But getting to know Joe over the last 20 plus years, I know that he really didn't like manufacturing guitars. He liked building these custom things for his friends, like building that purple, Tele for Ricky, or Steve Wariner. Those were friends of his and people that he liked their music and liked what they were doing. And like the Mandocaster with the bender that he built for Ricky, or like the lap steel that he built for Jerry Douglas that looked like a little Strat but with just two pickups. And he built all these custom things, or the double bender guitars he built for Jimmy Olander. They were for artists that were making music. And so here's this kid from Texas, saying he wants something like he's already made before. So I was disappointed, but he said, just buy a good Telecaster and send it to me, and I'll put a bender in it. So I said, okay. So I bought a James Burton Telecaster from Fender. They had just started making it. It was 3 pickups, with the lace sensors and the black and gold paisley finish. And I sent it to Joe, and a couple months later, I got the guitar back, had a B-bender on it, and I was off to the races. And shortly after that, I moved to Nashville, and I started going to Joe's shop. Actually, he was working out of Corner Music, like 2 days a week, and then he, otherwise he'd have to go down to Leaper's Fork where his shop was. And I kept looking for a Glaser guitar. I kept thinking one was going to come up used, but one never did. I think the only Glaser guitar that I've ever seen for sale was there was a black Glaser Strat with a bender on it that came up for sale, probably 5 to 10 years ago. And I got to play it, and it just, that was not what I wanted. I wanted the 3 pickup Tele thing with the binding and the whole 9 yards. So, fast forward to earlier this year, was still looking, but I just had kind of pretty much given up, because it's like I have all these killer Telecasters, and it's like, I need another Telecaster like a hole in the head. And then there was this fateful episode of Tom Bukovac's, homeschooling show, where he went up into Joe Glaser's attic, and there were like bodies and necks and wood and stuff up there. And that kind of started me thinking. Then I would go by Glaser's shop, and also some of my friends like J.D. Simo. All of a sudden, these different Glaser guitars started showing up. So there was a flame maple neck Strat that was Fiesta red that J.D. Simo had, was playing for a little while. It wasn't his. He was borrowing it from one of the guys at Glaser's shop. And I found out that there had been some finished parts up in the attic that they had all been turned into guitars, and they were kind of like owned by the guys at the shop or by Joe or whoever, but they weren't up for trade or purchase or anything like that. Well, I happened to go down to the shop with Brad Paisley. We were working on a project, and Brad needed to do a little bit of finish work, and he was wanting Joe to show him how to do something, because Brad does a lot of finish work. He did all this. So while we were there, we saw this little stack of bodies and necks, and we looked at them, and we said, could this be? And so there was an alder body that was single bound, and this half of the binding was on it, but the binding starting from here up to here was like in pieces, and some of the pieces were missing. And it was already drilled out or routed out for 3 pickups, but it wasn't drilled for a bridge or any of the hardware or anything like that. And then there was this bird's eye maple neck that was huge. It had, roughed in a tele headstock, no frets, no dots, no side dots, no nut, no nothing on it. And it was just huge, kind of shaped on the back a little bit, but it was just gigantic. It was like a baseball bat. So, and we also found a pick guard. There was this pick guard was there, and it was really cool looking because you could tell it was like old celluloid and was kind of a little bit wavy and grainy looking. And sure enough, found out from Joe that this was a really old celluloid that he got and that he had cut himself. So Brad goes to Joe Glaser, and he has the body, the neck, and the pick guard. And he very audaciously says to Joe Glaser, you need to give Zach this. And Joe's response was, I'm not building a guitar, which is, what he told me, 30 plus years ago. And he said, y'all can put it together. Y'all can finish it out. I'm not having anything to do with it. He said, if it's a great guitar, you can put the Glaser logo on it. I said, but if it's not, we're going to put it in the wood chipper. So I walked out of Glaser's shop with Brad Paisley with a body and a neck. And, of course, the body was missing, half of its binding. We had a couple pieces, and we found some binding that matched up, but it was too tall. And so we took it back to Brad's shop, and we started working on it. So we got the body, and we started gluing this other binding on there. And it was mainly Brad. I was, kind of holding some things, and we'd put some little glue and kept, gluing little bits at a time as we went all the way around. And then later on, he sanded the binding down because it was too tall. And so he just sanded down the top, made it, flush with the top of the guitar. Then Brad shaped the neck. He shaped the headstock. He even did kind of the Tadeo kind of, shaping on the, where the, kind of neck goes into the headstock. Did it in a soft V, which is kind of my favorite shape. Let's see. And then the neck, I'm trying to remember the right order on this. I think he did some level of relicking on the neck. Then the neck went back to Glaser's shop so that they could put dots in it and side dots. Then he did some finish work. Then they put finish on it, and then they put the frets in, I believe. And then of course it was drilled out for machine heads, and we put, they put Clusons on there at Glaser's shop, put a string tree on there. And then the neck was pretty much done. I got a nut. Then on the body, once the binding was on there, we started experimenting with colors. And so Joe Glaser was over at Brad's shop, and the 3 of us were there, and Brad started mixing up colors. And I kind of wanted kind of a greenish blue color and kind of Taos turquoise. But, Brad was kind of mixing up a number of colors together, and he had a little bit of Taos turquoise, and he had some Sonic blue, and he had some other things in there. And he sprayed a bit on this body, and he showed it to Joe and I, and Joe said no. Which was funny because you have to remember, Joe had said he wasn't going to have anything to do with it. But he ended up being very opinionated about the color. And I think it was because he wanted this guitar to not look like any of the other guitars that he had done. He wanted it to be a different color. He wanted it to be an individual, guitar, not a copy guitar. And he also wanted to look like a color that he would have done. So Brad kept kind of mixing up the colors, and he kept spraying until he came up with this color. And, you know, Brad was happy with it. I was happy with it. Joe was happy with it. So Brad finished it out and, you know, scraped the binding. And then he did some relicking on it, which you can see back here, which I thought was fun. You know, gave it some of that good belt buckle wear. And you got some other little dings and such. And he really didn't do any cracking of the finish, but yet the finish started cracking when Glaser's shop got the guitar back and they were drilling it out for the bridge. So when they drilled the holes for the bridge, all this cracking started. And also, Brad had done some of this, you know, kind of brown stuff that's kind of come through the finish, or I don't know how he did this, but more of it started coming through. And so I don't know if that's coming from the wood or what, but I love it. So we had paint on the body. So I take it down to, you know, again, it's down at Joe's shop, and Aaron Parker is doing the lion's share of the work on this. And so he puts the bridge on, he installs the pickups, he puts the bender on there, he wires it up, you know, lines up the pick guard and everything, gets the neck on there. Another chap at the shop named Max put the frets in, and then Clayton plucked it, and I think Nick Drushel did a little bit of work on it, and of course, you know, Joe kind of oversaw some of it, but you know, he kept his distance. So because he was a little concerned that the guitar wasn't going to turn out great, but it really, really did. So again, this was a dream guitar for me, something I always wanted to have, you know, as a teenager, and well, even up till today. I love these guitars, and to finally be able to have a real Glaser Bender guitar is a big deal. I got to talk about the logo. So I'd seen these guitars, you know, through the years, and I thought this was going to be a water slide decal, and it is, but only the Glaser part. The, you know, spaghetti Glaser is a water slide, but then the part that says Bender is actually these transfer letters that where you put it up against the headstock and you rub a pencil on this sheet and then it transfers on there. And so Joe still had a sheet of that, and so it was really funny. I took the tuners off and the string tree off, and it was funny watching Brad use, you know, a pencil and holding this sheet up against the headstock and, you know, rubbing against it. And it actually ended up having trouble with, there was only one B left, and we've got to do Bender, and the B ended up coming apart. So he ended up using a P and an 8 on there to make the Bender part of the logo. But yeah, and you know, once it all came together, it was just like, wow, I have a real Glaser Bender guitar from the 1980s, because that's when, you know, this body and neck was made in the 80s, and then it was abandoned for some reason. And you know, I think just Joe was kind of moving away from manufacturing already, from, you know, actually building guitars. And so I was fortunate and glad to be able to get it. And so of course glad that you know, glad that Joe was willing to, you know, give the, you know, the body and neck up. And then grateful for Brad Paisley for, you know, twisting Joe's arm and for doing all this finish work. Then of course, again, to Aaron Parker for doing so much work on this guitar, for Max. And I've got some videos of these guys. I got Max to talk a little bit, so you'll get to meet him. I got Aaron to talk a little bit about the guitar. And then I was, Joe Glaser was kind enough to talk a bit. And you need to understand that there are no more of these parts lying around. This is it. This was the last of it. And so do not call Joe Glaser or his shop and say, hey, I want you to build me a guitar. Are there any more parts left? There's nothing left. It is, the bottom has been dredged. So no, that's all gone. So I'm going to have a little clip of me showing you all the sounds that this can make. And again, I need to thank Seymour Duncan pickups for giving me the pickups in here. They are fantastic. So you'll hear all that the pickups do, and the Music City Bridge wiring harness does. And yeah, and then you'll have Max talking a little bit about fretting it up, and Aaron, and then Joe. And yeah, I just really appreciate it.
Here we are, guys. Just finished up one of the last Glaser benders. Beautiful teal color. This nice quilted curly neck. I mean, this thing had been seasoning for about 35, almost 40 years back, just air drying in the back there. And we recarved the neck, got the body up and running, put a bender in it, some new frets, new nut in there. And you could feel, how stiff that neck was when you're hammering in those frets. I mean, it's stiffer than most teles out there, most maple necks. It's a real treat, and excited for you guys to hear it. Got a great little bender mechanism in there. You can see the little finger moving when you pull the lever, and
All right, guys, so I wanted to talk about the electronics on this. So, these guitars normally had 3 pickups, and they had this Hot Strat Stack Duncan pickup in the middle, wired top coil only. And I was trying to decide what pickups I wanted to use. I knew I was going to use a Duncan in the middle. And then earlier this year, I ended up going to Santa Barbara and getting to tour the Seymour Duncan factory and getting to meet. I think I'd met Seymour Duncan in the past, probably at NAMM or something like that, but I got to see Seymour and Mark DeLorenzo, who is the CEO of Seymour Duncan, and MJ, Maricela Juarez, that is the kind of master builder, master winder there. And it was a ton of fun to get to tour the place. And then also, as a parting gift, they gave me some pickups, and it was a set that they called a 53 tapped pickup, and it's from the custom shop, and it was a neck and bridge. And the neck pickup is kind of a normal vintage style neck pickup, early 50s style, that has a brass cover, but then of course chrome plated, which creates kind of a darker neck pickup sound. The bridge was tapped, and so the tapped output was like 6.5K, which is pretty normal for certain blackguards. I mean, there's a lot of blackguards that were made in 53 that have, the mid 6K, output. And then when you get all the rest of the windings going, it's about 9.5K. And it's, I was really concerned when they gave me the pickup, whether I would, whether I'd even use it or not, or whether I'd like it, because normally, what I think of with tapped pickups is, one sound that's weak and anemic, and another one that's overblown and bloated sounding. And I found that this one really sounded great. The 6K, which is in the up position on my switch here, it's just a really great Telecaster sound. Then you can hit the 9K. And you can hear it has a little more output. And it has a lot more mid-range, so it works great as a boost, as a solo boost, especially if you're playing, maybe something with some gain, or if you just want a fatter sound. It's really nice because you could just stay on the back pickup, and let's say even if you were playing something on a ballad, it just makes where the high strings sound like you went from 10s to 11s, helps if you turn it up. 6K, 9K. So just very, very usable. Very, very much a fan of this pickup. The other thing, so then of course you have this hop strat stack that's wired top coil only, and it's wired to this Music City Bridge wiring harness. And this is not a tone control. This is a blend control for this pickup, but it only works in this position. So only when you're in this number 5 position, bridge pickup only, does this come into play. And turn all the way down, it does nothing. And as you turn it up, it brings in this pickup. So here I'll kind of hold a chord, and hopefully you can kind of hear it as the bridge pickup comes in, as the middle pickup comes in, I should say. And the magic of it is to just use some of it, because if you want it full up on both, you might as well go to this position, which defeats this control. And the whole point of that is to be able to have this as a preset. So what you do is you play something and you bring in just enough to kind of soften the high end, because it kind of acts as kind of an interesting EQ. And then it makes you play all those great Brent Mason licks. Then, of course, let's turn the blend off so it's back to just being this pickup. Now I can pull this up, and now I have the outside 2 pickups, which normally wouldn't be available when you're using a regular 5-way switch unless you have one of those super switches or something. So again, bridge pickup, here's both pickups, which, to me always when you do both pickups, either makes me want to play Chet Atkins or R&B, so you can go. Or you can go. Or you can put it into this number 4 position, and with this pulled out, you've actually got all 3 pickups, which to me is even more Chet sounding. Then you can do. Let's just hear this regular number 4 position, which is just, of course, this at 6K and this top coil only. You kind of have the kind of your pretty stratty sounding. And then if you want to take it to like a fat stratty kind of snarly tone, you hit this to the 9K, and then you get. Which is kind of fun to do. Get that fat, slightly quacky. You lose a little quack, when you have a higher output pickup. This is the middle pickup by itself. You have the front 2 pickups, you know, for you know. Then we can go all the way to the neck by itself, and you know, you get. And in this position, you can still do the pull on that blend control to get both pickups. Again, I landed on just doing the you know, the neck by itself. But yeah, very versatile wiring, and I usually kind of shy away from anything. You know, I usually do kind of the 2 pickup traditional Telecaster thing. The most I do is, you know, have it where the tone control only works on the bridge, and so this is a much more complex than I would normally use. However, every sound on it is super useful, and just to have really good Strat sounds right there, and have this kind of boosted, you know, bridge pickup sound available, you know, whenever I need it, is a really nice and great thing. It kind of makes for a do-it-all super telly, as it were. So yeah, of course, then you have the bender. This is Joe's latest iteration, which has been out for, I guess, the last 5 to 10 years, which is convertible. It can be moved from the B string to the G string, and of course I've got it set on the B, and I've got, you know, brass saddles. These are compensated. Looks like they're bent. I don't know what manufacturer they are, but they're nice. And this is a Glendale bridge. I really was kind of trying to figure out what kind of bridge I wanted to use, because normally I would have used a Fender bridge, but being that this is a Glaser guitar, I didn't want to have a Fender bridge on it. And so a friend of mine had this Glendale bridge lying around, and I saw it, and I remembered having a Glendale bridge back, you know, 15, 20 years ago, and it was great. And so I thought, well, you know, it starts with a G, and it's good quality, and we'll use that. So I really like this bridge. It's very nice. So yeah. Let's see, anything else about the electronics and such? You know, of course, yeah, I just love the bender. I've got it set to a short throw. I'm not really into long throw or even medium throw. I like it to be, you know, pretty, you know, quick. Yeah, it just works and does what it's supposed to do.
It was cool to see these things come from, you know, just sitting around up in the attic for 30 years or whatever it was, and getting to see Skaggs and Steve Wariners and Jimmy Olanders and everybody's that come through, and you get to see how cool they are and how cool they were. And we just kept thinking, it's like, man, there's still some up there. They're still living. Just getting to bolt them together and hear them ring, and they're lightweight. You know, they're kind of everything you want to tell it.
So I didn't build this guitar. My guys went up into the attic and picked through some of the bodies some of them were painted and leftover bodies and necks. Some of them weren't painted. You know, like they put 1 or 2 of them together, I guess, to just have around the shop. And somehow, I think Jeff King is largely to blame. He came in and saw one of them. Or did you do this first, Zach?
I think it was Jeff.
One of you guys came in and said, I want that guitar. And so, a number of bodies and necks were pulled down from the attic, finished up, and turned into guitars. This being one of them, the Zach Child model. Already beaten up. God, it's unbelievable how rough you are on this stuff. But here's the thing. The things that were in the attic were either something that had a defect or something that were so good that I was holding on to them at the end. So I'm not sure which one, whether this is a good body or a bad body, but when it was finished and you went and played it on the awards show, and I was talking to you and Brad, I was like, is it any good? Tell me the truth. Is it any good? Because it was either up there because it's particularly good body, and I was checking resonance and all that kind of stuff at the time, or because it was not a good body. So apparently it all worked out. I play steel, and I like music. I like country music, and in the midst of everything, I sort of didn't get to listen to some of the old music I really loved, the old Buck Owens and Merle Haggard and Mel Street and all these things all these years, particularly things involving steel. And recently, somewhat because of the Cocaine and Rhinestones podcast and a couple other things, I've gone back and listened to a lot of the old music. I realized I really fundamentally love it. That the love's exactly the same, even if I've been put off by some of the stuff that came out in the 90s and the 80s and the 10s and the 20s. And it's like, I don't want to hear any more of that stuff. And looking at this bird's eye maple neck, I have the same feeling. It's like, it feels exactly like listening to the steel that got me playing steel. I remember looking at this, why I got absolutely spellbound by bird's eye maple and curly maple, and started using it at a point where almost nobody was. Phil Kubicki was, Paul Reed Smith was, I was. I don't know if anybody else was. And I know Paul probably got his fixation from Les Paul's. I don't know where Phil Kubicki got his. Mine came from my Showbud steel, which one of the two Showbud steels I had a bird's eye necks, and I just loved it. And also, growing up, the bed that I slept my first 15 years in had a curly, one of the newel posts or whatever there was curly maple, and it just mesmerized me. So looking at this, after all these years, having not made one of these in 30 years, it just has an overwhelming power. The neck is, I guess you guys finished shaping this neck, but it's very, was this square when you got it, or was it pre-shaped a little bit?
It was pre-shaped a bit.
Yeah. So, because it's got a little bit of that Tadeo Gomez shape, which I was really caught up in the Tadeo Gomez thing because of Billy Hullett, who introduced me to Tele. Anyway, that's it. You asked me, Zach, I know where the 3 pickup thing came in. I've talked about that a lot, about why I started building, where this idea of even putting a middle pickup came into a Tele and blah, blah, blah. But you asked about where the single binding came from, because I did Steve Wariner's and I did a bunch of them like that. And I think it was just an aesthetic I liked. I thought binding on the front and the back was too busy. I liked having one curve. And I think that the white makes it stand out in some beautiful, just iconic Tele look. I didn't invent the binding, but I certainly appreciated it. And just doing one side, I did it really early on. I did a guitar for a guy in Germany, Manfred Peter, and it was, I believe, front and back bound. And I remember thinking that if I did another bound guitar, I would just do the front because it was too busy with front and back. And not a lot of people, I think Fender did some front only ones, but not a lot of people had done front only ones that I was exposed to. And I just think it's, for my own taste, it's much more elegant and no binding, and much more elegant than being bound front and back. And then the rest of it is all just copied very carefully from Fender. Fake decal, my decal, Glaser, whatever it says, Glaser Bender, done to look exactly like Fender, because at that point they weren't bothering. People like me weren't on the the list to be sued, which I would be today if I made this headstock. I think when people went out and played these, when Steve Wariner and Skaggs and stuff played these Tellies, Ricky's was purple single bound, people in the audience thought that they were Fender, and so I really sold Fender guitars, so Fender had no reason to be mad at me. But the details of how all this was shaped, exactly how round that ought to be, and how scooped this ought to be, that all came from closely studying the early Tellies and having the influence of Bill Hollett, who explained to me why they were perfect. Why every little curve that Fender did was perfect, and you shouldn't mess with it, and I didn't. Anyway, that's my impression of this guitar. I'm glad you have it. I'm glad it sounds good, and you know, so this is the Music City Bridge 3 pickup blend.
Yep.
And just the classic middle pickup, and then our bender. I'm glad you have it. If it didn't sound good, by the way, I would have taken it away and put it through the chipper. So I'm kind of glad that this nice piece of bird's eye didn't have to go to the trash. Aaron Parker's one of the guys that put this together against my will, because I stopped building sometime in the late 90s, and I'd had enough sawdust and lacquer thinner and just didn't want to build anymore. And I'm glad they put these together, but there aren't any more parts upstairs. There's no more necks that will become guitars, no more bodies to become guitars. So don't call and ask if there's one more up there, because they went through there and they really thoroughly depleted the final stash. There was like 6 or 7 of them, and they're gone. But I'm glad it happened, but it did happen against my will, and they're gone.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. And of course, that at the intro of the show was me playing the wonderful Steve Wariner part to Some Fools Never Learn. A great tune and a really great guitar part. It's very steel guitarish with the second half, where you kind of start off with the low string stuff. But then when you get to the just a really great part, and you ought to check that out. I've made a kind of Glaser bender guitar playlist. That's there's a link in the description. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole of hearing some Glaser bender guitars, some of the examples are like that one. Steve's still using a Glaser Strat with a bender, but some of the other ones like Baby I'm Yours, and of course all the Skaggs stuff is all the Glaser single bound Tellies. So, all right, guys, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.